this is a great start to the series. 2 months are being made into one for today. I apologise for my slacking. I left last month on a slight cliffhanger with a few cameras, but trust me when I say you will get plenty of answers to them. Whether they're positive answers, you'll find out. Only a few days after putting out the previous recap video, my black and white images from Norway came through. Thank you, FilmSafe. This was my first roll of film coming out from my Pentax, and I couldn't be much happier. Going with black and white film whilst out in Norway was such a good choice, with the snow standing out against the varying shades of black. The highlight was seeing my Northern Lights picture coming out well. I used the same technique of resting the camera in the snow and leaving it for 4 seconds, and despite some light trails, it came out super well. Surreal to see a black and white photo of the Northern Lights, but it is probably my favourite from the bunch. Alrighty, well, April was kind of full of dud shooting. I wanted to challenge myself with the other old lens that I have, a 70-210 lens for macro photography, but it was in the thick of night, and needless to say, there wasn't much success. Remember this guy? Well, we've had quite the run-in. The very strangely built battery charger thing arrived, but the battery could barely hold a charge, so once again, I had to buy something else to get this thing working. Batteries weren't too hard to come by, but once again, it's another expense on just such a novelty. On top of that, the battery arrived in a small letter and in the most suspicious packaging I think I've ever seen. Like, what is this? It charged and held its charge, so once I had finally got everything together and the camera finally looked healthy, I took a nice trip to White Park Bay to put it through its paces. Everything seemed to be operating smoothly and the new battery I ordered was working fine. Photos and videos were being taken and the camera itself was actually fairly nice to shoot with, even if the drawbacks of a floppy disk were very obvious in slow playback, having to change every 5 shots and 15 seconds of video. Nonetheless, it was the good excuse to clamber around the rocks and take some funny B-roll. I headed home, happy that I'd finally got everything together to get this piece of old tech going. Feeling upbeat, I returned home and booted up my Hunker Junk Windows 95 machine, probably about 3 times before it actually started working. I plugged in the floppy disks and eagerly awaited the results. Spoiler alert, there were none. I desperately tried all 3 floppy disks in the hope that the first one was a dud, but no, the floppy disk drive was dead. Several troubleshooting attempts, formatting some disks and trying to connect the camera through my USB to Mac, even with like the old ass software they have, there was no success of extracting these pics. Here's some camera to camera action to try and convey what sort of pictures this thing takes, but it's not quite it, is it? I've yet to invest in a USB floppy disk reader, so the Special America video is definitely a work in progress. Okay, hopping over to the other big camera from last month, the anticipation for the big boy has come to this. A big box with some kanji on it. Yeah, this will definitely be the Mamiya. Very encouraged to see just how well wrapped this one is. A lot of local newspaper for padding as well as bubble wrap around the main unit. Using a better sized knife this time, I carefully tore into releasing this big bit of metal. One layer of bubble wrap down and I could grip the sides of this monster, and it's fair to say that I was quite excited. And there it was, the Mamiya Super 23. These things were used as press cameras in Japan, and it felt like this one had a decent bit of use. There was some general wear and tear, but overall it looked fine. Mechanisms did what they were supposed to do, and the only slight concerns were for the focusing, something that I'd have a look online for fixing and acclimatizing to, and the tiniest bit of lens fungus. This whole setup is a step back for me, as there is no electric automation at all, so I'll have to learn the shooting routine. I briefly alluded to it in the previous video, but the reason this camera is significantly bigger is so it can take bigger film. 120 to be precise, and let me tell you, that's a bigger number than 35. So my first impressions with this big old Mamiya Super 23 is it's pretty metal. This is just an absolute behemoth, and I love it for that. It's ginormous. I've done a full check of everything, but the shutter opens and closes. It still has room for a strap, although I feel like I'd be being, like towing a monster truck with this thing. I suppose cut to whatever I do next with this thing. I don't know what it will be. After some lovely evenings, including a spontaneous dip in the sea, I headed back to the mainland for my sister's wedding. As well as taking my Pentax for some of the daytime festivities, I was asked to take some photos of the bride and the bridesmaids' preparation. I didn't have the best track record of taking good pictures of my sister, and she probably wouldn't have been too upset if the photos were no good, but I was pretty happy with how these turned out, and so was she. And for the curious few, yeah, the wedding went really well. I managed to elude the videographer, but the photographer got my angles pretty well, I'd say. Before heading back home, I wanted to plunge back into the equipment I gathered before my grandparents' place was sold. I knew of the tech, but very little about whether it all worked. With a recent top-up of knowledge, I probed this neat Super 8 Canon camera, which despite the probably 40-plus-year-old batteries, still whirred and will have recorded over whatever roll was still in the camera. This plus a couple of unused rolls alongside meant that I could give this a go for whatever special occasion might call for it, which, exciting stuff. Back over on the north coast of Northern Ireland, as the sunsets have been getting later, I found myself chasing the sun. Very much enjoying taking my little car out under the cover of night to enjoy the beaches at their quietest. I've been getting used to what works for long exposure shots, but after enjoying how my previous evening pics had turned out and how much they had been viewed, I wanted to push into that mostly, and despite my very dirty lens, trust me, I did try cleaning it before I went out, I got some decent pics, and one standout I was super happy with. Thank you for watching along my escapades of the previous 2 months. I don't know what direction any of this is going to take, whether I'm going to keep on doing it. I know that I've got a free summer ahead of me, and I'm going to be taking photos and videos of wherever that will take me. Photography is definitely something that I enjoy, otherwise I wouldn't be doing this, and it's something that I'd be prepared to do as a profession, but I need a foot in the door, and I think just doing this in the meantime will keep me active, will be testing me, and yeah, I'll just be having fun with it. So if you want to support me in the meantime, as I'm sort of in this limbo of not quite knowing what I do next, you can just, stick around the channel, always appreciated. You can see what I do on other places, speedrunning stuff, and I guess if you're feeling extra kind, I also do have a Ko-fi. Or coffee, I don't know how it's pronounced, but I do have one of those, and these are photos that I've taken during the month, which are just sort of, miscellaneous things. But if you want to have a look at what is probably likely to come in the next video, I keep my Unsplash up to date, as well as my Instagram, so you can see what will be featured in the next video, more than likely. And yeah, have a lovely June.